And this brings us to the end of our cruise. We're disembarking today, and we're back in Vancouver, and now off to Vancouver Island. And here's us driving through Stanley Park. So for those of you who've not been in Vancouver before, this is a beautiful drive out of downtown Vancouver that then takes us over one of the very well-known bridges here in Vancouver called the Lionsgate Bridge. In fact, if you followed some of the early Travel Bear videos as we were leaving on our trip, we went right underneath the Lionsgate Bridge as we left the cruise terminal and left the Port of Vancouver. So it's an incredibly beautiful urban park. It's called Stanley Park, and an incredibly beautiful urban park that sits right just on the edge of the downtown core of Vancouver and covers a considerable piece of land. And it certainly has been the subject of many developers trying to get even just little teeny chunks of it to be able to develop, but the province and the city have always basically said flatly no, because it's not only ecologically important, but it really is one of the great draws of the city. And coming up, we have the Lionsgate Bridge. So for those of you who don't recognize my voice, I'm Scott. I'm the other half of the Travel Bear. Or better half, other half, whichever. Anyway, here's the Lionsgate Bridge. And over here into the Port of Vancouver. Let me get my fingers out of the way. There we go. And it's a pretty cool bridge because it's all, cable suspension, that whole deal. So it's a pretty neat bridge, all things being equal. So, and on the other side, we will now be in what is aptly named North Vancouver. So that will finish off the little bit, and we'll see you at the ferry terminal. And now we're back. So Ian's in the driver's seat, I'm in the passenger seat, otherwise you wouldn't be getting this video. But now we are over the Lionsgate Bridge and through the small sort of urban part of North Vancouver. And we're now on what is affectionately referred to as, I think it's officially called the Upper Levels Highway. But so-called the upper levels because, North Vancouver slopes pretty sharply up from the inlet that sits where, Vancouver comes in. And if you look down past and over Ian's shoulder, you might be able to see down in the harbor. I'm not sure if you can.
Lots of trees.
Lots of trees. No, so you're getting a very nice view of the trees. And it's so-called the Upper Levels Highway because it's up on the side of a mountain, essentially. There are homes up further, and as you can imagine, those homes are pretty pricey. Because, North Van. I mean, Vancouver housing prices have always been expensive, but up that way, right up that way, is some pretty rich homes. But this drive is just, an incredibly beautiful one, and it's always sort of a reminder of Vancouver for me. So a little bit of my backstory as the occasional reporter here on the Travel Bear channel. I grew up here in Western Canada. I grew up on Vancouver Island, which is where we're heading now. But I spent 5 years of my life here in Vancouver, more in an eastern suburb of Vancouver called Burnaby, where I went to school doing my undergraduate degree. And so, spent a lot of time tootling around all around Vancouver. And this drive is certainly, very reminiscent of many trips back and forth to the island to see my parents when I was going to school. As this is really the main route to get from, anywhere in mainland Vancouver to the ferries, which is where we're heading next. So it's about a 11 or 12 kilometer trip out to the ferries. And when we get closer to the ferries, I will pick up the reporting again. Alright, now we're coming down off of the upper levels as we descend down into a small village that is just, I mean, it's technically part of Vancouver, the whole Vancouver area, but known as Horseshoe Bay. So named because the bay looks like a horseshoe. And for many years, this was the principal crossing. And, you know, for the longest time, this was the only connection between Vancouver and the mainland. There was a ferry elsewhere, but this was the main one. Since me growing up here, there is another route that travels more towards the southern part of Vancouver, so it's much more convenient if you're going to the airport. But this is certainly one of the routes, and one that's quite historic as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, we're just coming into the ferry terminal, and we'll soon have to stop and pay the piper, as they say, pay the fare to go over on the ferries, which, I mean, has gone up considerably since I was a kid, obviously. So now runs about $65 or $70 for a car and 2 passengers. So, all right, well, I'm gonna put this down so I can help with the going through the booths process. But come back in a moment. All right, so we're now at just coming up into the booths for the ferry terminal. One of the things you may notice on those weird signs that seem to be flashing, but anyway, Nanaimo, Vancouver Island, and then there's Nanaimo reservations only. So one of the big changes that happened to the ferries in the 30, 40 years since I first started taking these is you can now reserve a spot, which is convenient because when this gets very busy, you can wait. If you don't have a reservation, you could wait, half of a day, to get the ferry over. When I was growing up, maybe one sailing, one 2-hour cycle. But these days, I mean, I've known people who have just not got on the ferry, like literally because there was no space. And so they've had to come back the next day. But now you can. You pay a slight upcharge for the privilege of reserving. But it does make sure that when you get here, you get on the ferry that you intend to go, which, obviously is very important for tourists, but also for people who do this regularly, so anyway, we'll pick this up when we get through this and we get stationed in the terminal or in the terminal area, and hopefully we'll get on the next ferry, which the time is 10:16, and I think the next one is 10:45, so let's hope. And here we are past the gates, paying the fare. I was wrong. It's actually $110 for the ferry terminal. That's a unreserved ticket, like you just show up and you pay. It actually seems like when you reserve that the fare is actually not as bad, although depending on the really high demand routes, it can be more. But anyway, certainly a lot more than when I was a kid. But of course, that's going to be the case because inflation, and just 40 years on. So anyway, here we are. We're in the lineups waiting, and not sure if we'll load onto this ferry or not, but if not, then we have a nice wait in the scenic area around the ferry terminal, which is really kind of beautiful. So anyway, there we are. And here we are coming into the ferry. So we've come down the long line, and we're now just coming into the terminal proper, where we will most likely make it right onto the ferry. So there's this structure of the ferry terminal that's been here for years, and I know they've just recently been doing some renovations to give it some more And here we are going deep into the belly of the Queen of Cowichan.
bright day on the Queen of Cowichan, and we're just heading over to the island, and yeah, just stunning views, just like our cruise that we just got off. So on these ships you've got lots of space to be outdoors and enjoy the sun and the water. And the stunning views. And you see Vancouver in the distance over there. I'd be careful of my phone so I don't lose it.
Alright, here we go. We're now going off the ferry. Your temporary reporter is in a different position in the car right now because we parked a little bit too close to the wall of the ferry. So I had to climb out over the driver's seat. That was an adventure. And so now I get to ride as the backseat passenger. Much of a backseat driver? No, whatever. So here we are. We're off the ferry and we are now on Vancouver Island, where we passed probably about 12 hours ago, 18 hours ago, coming down, to head into the port in Vancouver. So we will continue to do little spots as we travel back to my hometown here on Vancouver Island. It's about an hour's drive, maybe 45-minute drive from here. But we'll do little spots here and there as we go. Alright, well, we're back and we're partway through to my hometown in Port Alberni. But right now we're passing along the beautiful Cameron Lake. So there's a highway that basically runs right here, right along the shore of the lake. This lake is incredibly deep. It was carved out, I believe, by a glacier at some point, or at least the waters at the very bottom of it are incredibly cold, and as such it doesn't, stuff doesn't really degrade. There was in fact an accident that happened in this lake many years ago, going back 45-50 years ago, where a small float plane had landed and flipped, and unfortunately it took its pilot and a couple passengers with it. But when they were finally able to get down to the depth to be able to recover it, they found that the bodies were in extremely good condition even after so long, because it was so cold. So it is, you can sort of see once we're past the trees that, it's sitting right on the edge of what essentially is a series of mountains all along the side, and eventually it comes around. And then at the far end of this lake, we will go through an area called Macmillan Provincial Park, or what all the locals know of it as is Cathedral Grove. It is an old growth stand of trees that was basically preserved as a provincial park, to try and preserve some of the old growth forests, but also to act as an educational point for the area. There are some specific stops along the roadway through the park, but other than that, it's basically leave the place alone as much as possible. Or if you are going to go into it, you're only allowed to go into it on foot, and even then to a more limited degree. So again, as we come along here, we get to, again, alongside Cameron Lake. Obviously we're going through the trees a lot, but you can certainly see, it's a beautiful lake. And, as a kid, we would come up here every once in a while, to swim, etc. in the summertime. There were some sites back a little bit on the highway that certainly showed, or that certainly had some little beaches and stuff you could go into. Because unfortunately, along a good chunk of this part of the lake, it's basically road, rock, and lake. So there's really not very many places along here where you can actually, like pull off and go swimming, except for where they've created some sandy beaches and stuff. So, yeah.
So this is one of my favorite drives. It's got a lot of fun curves, and if you've got a fun cart drive, it can be just a lot of fun, like I just said. And here we are entering Macmillan Grove, or Cathedral Grove, Macmillan Provincial Park. I always keep on calling it Macmillan Grove.
And if I remember correctly, the history of calling it Macmillan Grove or Macmillan Provincial Park is that one of the two people that made up the forest industry company, Macmillan and Bloedel, which was a large forest industry company that was in fact a major employer in my hometown for a long, long time, that this tract of land was actually given to the province by one of the founders of the company to try and preserve, the old growth forest.
Oh, here, trees here.
Oh, some of the trees in here go back 300 or more years old. Like there's some huge ones that, I've got pictures of from previous trips where they've basically, they've fallen. And the deal here is if trees fall, they will clear up roadways, they'll clear up a trail, but they won't haul it away because they recognize that, trees falling in the forest, is part of the natural ecosystem, and that eventually things like various mushroom species will begin to degrade the logs. Eventually those nutrients are returned to the forest ecosystem, etc., right? So they try to leave it as natural as possible while, of course, trying to maintain, some of the trailways and stuff that they've created. But, if a tree falls, they'll just cut enough to keep the trailway open, and that's it, right? No more. So that, as you can see, the trees do go up, and these are not even the big ones. A lot of the trees along the roadways are replants from, going back 30 or 40 years ago. When a good chunk of this area was logged. My hometown really was a two-industry town. When I was growing up, it was either, you either worked for or relied on someone that worked for one of the forest industry companies, or you were somehow involved in the fishing industry. And for fishing, it was mostly salmon. There were some other catches, but salmon was the big, was really the big catch. And on this end, there isn't so much of a official beginning or end of the park. At the other end, it's a little bit more, here's a sign. But at this other end, you just basically go up into this, you begin the climb to go to the summit of the pass that goes from this side of the mountains to the other side. The locals around here don't even know what the pass is called. I think it might be the Alberni Summit or something like that. But all the locals just know it as the Hump. I always have a good laugh because obviously, Mr. Travel Bear and I live in Ontario, and I always have a good laugh when people in Ontario talk about mountains, and they very proudly point at this, what I call hills with attitude, and proudly proclaim it to be a mountain. Although I know there are some mountains in Ontario, it's pretty flat otherwise. But comparing, one of those mountains to one of those mountains, I think I've got the Ontario folks. Although, at this point, I'm you know, I'm half Ontario, half BC, but always a BC boy at heart, so. And here we go with the climb up the hump. Stretch of highway, you get variable amounts of aggressiveness of people. You know, people that drive this every single day, you know, and are basically like, get out of my way. And then others who are, you know, pretty good about it. And, you know, so anyway, I'll wrap it up there and we'll return as we come back into my hometown. Alright, and the last little piece of this video of the drive over from Vancouver to my hometown is, you know, arguably one of my most favorite parts of the drive, and mostly that's because it means that I'm home.
It's because of the chocolate shop here.
Yeah, it's really because of the chocolate shop over there, but no, this is home for me, as much as, you know, Ian and I share a lovely home in Toronto. This is where my heart and soul is at home. It's where I grew up. You know, as you can tell, it's a pretty beautiful place to be. So my hometown sits at the mouth of a long inlet that comes in from the Pacific Ocean and ends in basically where the harbor is, and that connects up into one of the major rivers that passes through town. So there's actually a fork in the road here, and way back in the day it went to two separate towns. So there was a city of Alberni, which is the side we're going to, and there was a city of Port Alberni, which is the other side of town. The Port Alberni was literally the port part of the city, and this part was more residential, for, you know, lack of a difference, but, you know, for all intents and purposes, it was two separate cities until 1967, when the powers that be decided that it would make better sense to amalgamate and turn it into one larger town. I mean, obviously cost savings and all that business, right, was part of it, but I think it probably just made sense at the time politically as well. So, yeah, so there's basically this long roadway, you know, that descends into the valley on this side of town, and there's a similar one on the other side, and ultimately at the very bottom of the hills, there's now obviously a road that interconnects them, you know, and is part of the fabric and the history of town. So obviously you can see off into the distance some of the beautiful, you know, snow-capped mountains. Zoom in a little bit. You see one off to the right. Now, the main mountain that most people would identify with this town is actually behind us, and we'll see if we can get a little bit of a shot of it later on, called Mount Aerosmith. So, all right, so that's it. Welcome to Port Alberni, my hometown, and well, maybe we'll do some other videos while we're here, but that's it. Signing off. Bye.